Well, it's Thursday morning. Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter. We got one or two things we need to talk about regarding the conflict in Europe, a couple other things. I just read that Trump said he wants, um, excuse me, he wants to take the troops out of Syria. We need to talk about that. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here with Scott Ritter. And of course, before we get started, just make sure you, whenever you get a chance, you go to scottritter.com. For those of you who don't know about scottritter.com, you guys are all watching Scott's good works all over the place. Judge Napolitano, Jamal Thomas, you name it. He's out here everywhere and has been for a long time. Just absolutely doing great work in helping us to stop a nuclear war. We'd probably all be fried right now if it wasn't for Scott Ritter. So let's thank Scott for saving our measly little lives. But go to scottritter.com. Do two things. Number one, share that on all your social media platforms so everybody knows about scottritter.com. People can see what he's doing. And also there is a donate button there. Make sure you donate. It's very important to help Scott keep everything going on. Okay, Scott, we got a couple of things to talk about. And let's start here. Trump's foreign aid freeze stranded independent media in Ukraine. Here's how you can help. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to help. So bottom line is a lot of people are familiar with this particular story. Apparently, Trump froze a lot of foreign aid all over the place. And in particular, one of the things that we found out from this, apparently the allegations are broad that, they're everywhere, that 80 to 90%, I've heard is anywhere from 80 to 92% of Ukraine's independent, completely, absolutely independent media was funded by USAID. It was just basically this whole game plan. And apparently now they're crumbling. Again, part of this 100-day thing, it's going to be hard for them to propagandize people when they don't have US control. Also, one other thing people need to know, I'm not going to bring up the article for this, I could, and Scott will know this. At the very beginning of the conflict, there were a lot of reports that apparently Zelensky consolidated all the media, closed down all the stations, and made like one 24-hour news channel that just gave propaganda all the time. So your thoughts on this whole thing with what we're finding out about the media, Ukraine media, what that means, Scott?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that Ukraine didn't happen in a vacuum. This is part of an old plan that the United States has been doing for some time now. Let's look at Russia. Go back and examine the American aid programs to Russia, especially once Vladimir Putin came into power. How USAID, used a variety of non-governmental organizations to promote, a free media, to promote, a media that was capable of telling the truth, media that wouldn't have dogs barking in the background.
I know it's Thursday. We already know the garbage men are coming and the dogs are doing their thing.
You've broke the code, and now once the dogs get excited, it's been a very exciting morning for them. They've been very on edge, and a bird flies by and they bark. So this could be an interesting interview. But the fact is, there's no such thing as a free media in any country that receives money from the United States to create a free media. A free media comes from within. It's just like democracy. We can't impose Jeffersonian democracy on people. That's not democratic. Democracy grows from within. People decide themselves what they want to do. They organize by themselves. And we destroyed any concept of a free and independent media in Russia. And I don't mean that because there is very strong independent media, but it has a heavy state control over it. Why? Because the state had to be suspicious of everything that happened, all the money that came in, because it wasn't about creating a genuine voice of the opposition to criticize. Vladimir Putin has said from the very beginning, I'm all about being criticized. It makes me stronger. I have no problem with legitimate criticism. And he encourages the media to, be responsible in its criticism. But when you're paid by the CIA not to criticize, but to undermine, then the state comes in and they shut it down. We saw this in Georgia. Now, all these, websites and social media and all the people on Twitter, we are free, we are independent, we aren't pro-Russian and all that. Nope, you're in the 100% pay of the United States of America, and now you have no money. And this is what happened in Ukraine. For all you idiots out there who carry the little Ukrainian flag on your social media, saying, look who I am, I'm supporting freedom and democracy, understand that you received your information from CIA-backed propagandists who weren't about telling the truth, but about promoting a U.S.-backed narrative that sought from the start to promote Ukraine and diminish Russia. That was their going-in objective. If that's going-in objective, where does fact fit in? It doesn't. And so this is what we're seeing right now is the end of the free media in Ukraine. And as a result, notice the Western media now is having to take a step back and go, well, we need to re-examine everything that we thought about was going on with this conflict. Look at the BBC. Watch the BBC's trajectory from being an absolute mouthpiece of Ukraine, MI6, the CIA. Now they published a report challenging the casualty figures. And amazingly enough, the BBC is saying 1.1 million dead Ukrainians. Imagine that. When you actually look at the facts, you realize Ukrainians have been suffering casualties beyond belief. And what about the Russians? Donald Trump's talking about 700,000 dead and all this stuff. No, the BBC's coming back and saying, now we're looking at, 90, 95, 98,000 dead. That's a lot of dead, by the way. That's not like nothing, but that's not anywhere near the propaganda that's being spewed out. And so one of the benefits that's happening here is that we're eliminating U.S. funded propaganda, and the truth will finally start coming out. And when the truth comes out, when these real numbers are known, all the artifice, all the posturing, goes away. It's very difficult for someone now to stand up and talk about a free and independent Ukraine, because there is no free and independent Ukraine. Ukraine is run by a dictator named Zelensky, who has no authority to be there. Constitutionally, the head of the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, should be in charge. But Zelensky's in charge. He refuses to have elections. It's martial law. And as you said, it's something he's been preparing for all along by eliminating any opposition media, consolidating into one state-controlled media, and then anything that's free and independent that comes afterwards is U.S. funded that conforms with the narrative promoted by the state. So I think one of the benefits of this freeze is the end of Ukrainian propaganda with this conflict. And you'll find no sooner than it ends that the truth starts coming out. The Economist starts telling them the truth, that Ukraine can only afford to put 5 or 6 guys in a forward fighting position. There is no rotation capability because they simply don't have the troops. And these 5 or 6 guys are told to fight and die and delay as long as possible, while Ukraine desperately tries to build defenses in the rear, which they can't do. And the Russians keep moving forward. Positions that are once held by 30 men are held by 6 men. You can't hold a position with 6 men. They die, and the Russians move forward. Budanov, the master of Ukrainian propaganda, the head of the Ukrainian intelligence service, just a couple months ago, when Ukrainian the Ukrainian propaganda was fully funded by the United States, Russia is losing. Russia's going to lose this war. We're winning. Everything's going great. Now Budanov's saying it's over by the summer. Ukraine won't exist by summertime. Amazing what happens when you get that cold dash of hard truth thrown in your face. Ladies and gentlemen, for all you people out there that have been challenging anything I and other people have been saying about this conflict, go to hell. I'm sorry. I don't care about you. You matter not to me. Your ignorance is manifest, but you no longer have the ability to fall on Ukrainian propaganda to prop up your pathetic arguments. Russia has won this war. That doesn't mean that I'm cheering Russia's victory. I'm speaking as an analyst saying this victory is inevitable. It's happening. It's occurring, and there's nothing that can be done to stop it. And this is important to understand. This is critical foundation of fact when you assess what Donald Trump's doing right now. And I guess we can transition into that aspect of this conversation. What is the strategy of the Trump administration? We see them have articulated, I mean, this is a man who's going to stop the war with a magic phone call. That phone call hasn't happened, and it isn't going to happen. The magic phone call, that is. He has been briefed by Keith Kellogg, a man whose entire picture of the Ukrainian conflict is drawn from the U.S.-funded Ukrainian propaganda. Do you guys see how dangerous it is to have the United States taking over a narrative in a conflict that doesn't allow any truth to be interjected? He wrote a paper back in April and May last year. You can go online and find it. Keith Kellogg's genius paper about the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Everything in that paper is wrong. Everything. The man knows nothing of Russia. He knows nothing of how the Russians operate. He's ignorant about how Ukraine operates, and the entire argument is farcical, nonsensical, childlike in its simplicity because it's just factually incorrect. Every aspect of it, from casualty figures to economic analysis, etc. But this is what he used to prepare his 100-day peace plan that has been sold to Donald Trump. Now, that peace plan has been leaked. The Russians have said, get the hell out of here. We're not even beginning to talk this nonsense. But that's Donald Trump's confronted with this fact. He was rushing to get a phone call with Vladimir Putin because he believed that Keith Kellogg's 100-day plan was going to resonate in Russia because he believes that Russia has a failing economy. He believes that the Russians are losing the war, that the Russians are losing huge amounts of casualties that they can't sustain. And suddenly it's becoming clear to Donald Trump, I believe, that everything he was told is a lie. This is why the phone call isn't happening. Because what are they supposed to talk about? There is no foundation. Trump gets one chance with Putin, one chance. And it has to be the right phone call with the right content. And right now there is no content. If he tries to sell this 100-day plan, the Russians will just hang up on him. And so now what I think is happening is what you alluded to in the introduction. They have this 100-day freeze. I think a lot is going to happen in this 100 days that isn't good for Ukraine. We may see the total collapse of Ukrainian society. Again, for all you wonderful people out there who think that Ukraine is a functioning democracy, understand this. Every salary is paid by the United States taxpayer. Every pension is paid by the United States taxpayer. Everything that happens in Ukraine is paid by the United States taxpayer. And it's no longer the United States taxpayer money going in there. Ukraine is bankrupt. They panic right now, calling Europe saying, we need money because there is no American money. Nobody's paying for all the corruption that we've been using to sustain our society. We can't bribe people, pay people off, can't do because we have no money, none whatsoever. And so if Europe can't step up, and Europe has no money left anyways, they're tapped out. So what happens when you can't pay anybody, when the salaries aren't paid? Do people still come to work? Do business continue to operate? Do state enterprises continue to operate without a budget, without anything, without any funding? You're looking at societal collapse. And I think societal collapse brings with it political collapse. One of the big problems that Trump is going to have is what to do about Zelensky, the Zelensky problem. Because Russia has said he's not signing any document, which means Zelensky has no future in Ukraine. Zelensky believes he's the president, that when this ends, he's going to be the president of a victorious Ukraine that's going to be backed by the EU, is going to be a NATO member, overseeing how to deal with a defeated Russia, the fantasy world that he lives in. Zelensky will not be part of this political solution. And that's a political problem for Trump. What are his choices? To go the Diem route? For the people that are confused and scratching their head, that's back in the early 1960s when the CIA killed President Diem in Vietnam because his continued presence was inconvenient to the United States. After we supported him, propped him up, promised him the world, we went in and we killed him because we couldn't move forward with him there. Zelensky will be eliminated, whether he's going to be killed, whether he's going to be sent into exile, whatever. Zelensky will be eliminated, and this lack of funding is going to accelerate that elimination. And that solves a lot of problems for Trump. I think Trump's going to delay this phone call for a little bit longer while the situation in Ukraine resolves itself. And it resolves itself by eliminating political problems for Donald Trump, like Zelensky, like the military, like anything. Russia wants demilitarization. Well, it's easier to demilitarize when the Ukrainian army collapses, retreats, and doesn't exist anymore. If you end the conflict now, you have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian troops that say, the old stab in the back routine that came out of Germany in World War I. We were stabbed in the back. We could have won this thing if we had just stayed forward, but the political leadership folded. Well, by letting the Ukrainian army collapse, you eliminate that issue as well. denazification, when you have the political collapse of Ukraine, Zelensky gone, etc., you facilitate those Russian objectives. So what happens when Trump is ready to make the phone call is that the things that Russia has demanded be part of whatever a negotiated settlement is will become manifest because they are the reality. And then Trump can move forward from there. Look, if there's people on here that advise Donald Trump, I'm going to give him the best advice possible from me, who is a pretty damn good Russian analyst. Make the phone call with Putin soon. Tell Putin we're not here to talk about Ukraine. We're not ready to talk about Ukraine. We need to firm it up, but I want to have that conversation with you. What I want to talk about is us. Me, you, America, Russia. I understand you got this big gig going on May 9th. It's called Victory Day. And it's a big deal. 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. The Russians always sell it as an Allied victory. But for the last several years, no Allied troops have marched there because of Russophobia. Just take a look at the nonsense with the reimagination of Auschwitz, the liberation of Auschwitz, where nobody acknowledges the role Russia played in liberating Auschwitz, and they minimize the role that Russia played, the Soviet Union played in defeating Nazi Germany. Trump should straight up say, I'm sending a high-level delegation. Donald Trump, it won't be you. You can't go there until a treaty is ready to be signed. But you know who could go? J.D. Vance. And you know who could accompany him? Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. You send them, and you send a company from the 82nd Airborne, a company from the 101st Airborne, and a company from the Big Red One, 3 divisions that fought, were the spearhead during World War II. And you send them there, and a platoon in each company wears their World War II battle dress, and they march with the Russians on Victory Day with an American vice president in the stand. You just won the Russians over. I'm just telling you right now, Donald Trump, this will win them over like you've never seen before, because you'll finally be giving them the respect they believe they've earned through this sacrifice of 27 million dead. And in doing so, you will create possibilities for further negotiations, because the Russians will finally look at you and say, you're respecting us. And we like that, as opposed to the Russophobic, approach that goes in. If we don't have any Americans at May Day, on Victory Day on May 9th this year, it's a missed opportunity. We have a golden opportunity to reset American-Russian relations. And the best way to do it is for Trump to send a high-level delegation to sit in the stands, not to support Putin's victory over Ukraine or any of that nonsense, to celebrate the Allied victory over Nazi Germany. And then on the way back, overfly Germany, overfly Scholz's residence, and just flap your wings at him, saying, stick it in your ear, Scholz, because Scholz is going around reimagining World War II as if only the Americans won it, that the Americans liberated Germany. Another piece of advice for Scholz. Franklin Roosevelt had a Secretary of Treasury named Morgenthau. And Morgenthau had a plan called the Morgenthau Plan. The plan was to deindustrialize Nazi Germany, because Germany could never be trusted with heavy industry again, because they dragged us into 2 world wars in 1 century. And if the Morgenthau plan had gone in, Germany would have been cut up into constituent parts. They would have lost millions of dead through this process of starvation, transitioning from industry to agriculture. And that would be Germany's fate. If Russia hadn't done what it did, and America had been the sole victor that Germany imagines, the fate of Germany would have been the Morgenthau Plan. Because in order to defeat Germany, America would have had to invest heavier, lose more casualties, have greater damage to their economy, so the revenge factor would factor in huge. But instead, the Soviets came in, raised the hammer and sickle over the Reichstag, and in a post-war environment, thanks in large part to Winston Churchill and his Iron Curtain speech, the United States had to reimagine Germany, not as a deindustrialized nation, but as an industrial asset to assist Europe in its reconstruction and positioning the West to withstand what we deem to be this Russian onslaught. So Germany owes its survival to a Soviet victory. You can't reimagine that history, Mr. Scholz. We have to stop talking to idiots in Europe and start realizing that going forward, if we're going to peacefully coexist in this world today, we need to have meaningful conversations with Russian leadership and Chinese leadership. And we have to realize that Europe and NATO aren't our friends. don't act as our friends, have been using us for decades, and will stab us in the back the first chance they get.
Let me throw something at you, Scott, just as a bit of a kind of an intellectual / philosophical discussion. Okay, something I've been talking about lately. I used to teach criminal justice, and people say, well, crime and how does a crime occur and all that. And basically, there's 3 things necessary for a crime, right? The criminal has the desire, the ability, and the opportunity. And what I would teach is you can't stop their desire, you can't stop their ability, but you can stop their opportunity, right? That's how you stop from being a victim of crime. You address the opportunity, right? There's various ways to do that. Okay, why do I say that? Proxy war in 3 elements. You need a target, such as Russia. You need a proxy / patsy. We got Ukraine. But then you need the patron. You need the benefactor, right? Okay, we got a proxy war. Seth Moulton, you remember, we're in a proxy war with Russia. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, Lindsey Graham, we're spending money to kill Russians. It was clear. Members of the U.S. Congress said we are in a proxy war with Russia. People from Ukraine said we are fighting Russia, so you don't have to in EU. The Russians said, well, clearly we're fighting NATO in the U.S. Everybody acknowledged it was a proxy war, but you need 3 elements. One of those elements is collapsing because the leader of the patron / benefactor is now said, I don't want this thing. This is a problem when you need 3 elements to create something, like in court. In order to have this crime of so-and-so, it has to have 3 elements. Well, we don't have first-degree murder because the person didn't lie in wait. They didn't plan that. That's an element needed for first-degree murder. Or, of course, there's the felony murder doctrine. We won't get into all of that stuff. I'm simply saying we've lost one of the elements of a proxy war. The patron wants out. That's a problem. Your thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely correct. I would say that it's the patron wants out. There's no doubt about that. But there are many political obstacles in front of the patron to get out. We can never forget and look, America's going to pay the price for what the Democrats did to Trump in the first term. This whole Russia gate, false story, etc. Donald Trump has a very thin skin, and he also is revenge oriented. And if you've insulted him, if you've attacked him and his family, he's going to get you. And so we're going to see a lot of revenge taking place in the weeks and months to come to hold those people who went after him in that first term accountable. But he is still sensitive to the allegations, which we know are wrong, that he was a Russian puppet, that he was a Russian tool, that he was colluding with the Russians. Never happened. It's just that Trump has a different world vision than the establishment. And that world vision doesn't view Russia as the perpetual enemy, the permanent threat, etc. Now, people interpret that as, oh, well, then he's drank Putin's Kool-Aid and he's this. No, it just means that Trump has a different worldview. But he has to be sensitive, and he is sensitive to being accused of being Putin's puppet. And so this is why he's playing the tough guy, taking the tough guy approach up front. He's buying into Keith Kellogg's approach. Marco Rubio talks about the Russians must make concessions and all this stuff. He does all that because he's concerned about the optics of doing what is necessary when you're a patron that says, I don't want this war anymore. And to give you an example, right now, Trump, first of all, our military aid has not stopped. The United States State Department's aid has stopped. But the Department of Defense aid that isn't linked to a U.S. state-controlled program is still ongoing. They're squeezing the last, $100 million or so in there, and they've opened up a new front. Under Trump, now Israel has shipped 90 Patriot missiles to Poland, where they're being packaged, and they'll go on to Ukraine. I just want to remind people that these 90 missiles were in storage in Israel. Ask yourself why. Because they're old missiles, many of which have expired, meaning we're not allowed to use them. The Israelis aren't allowed to use them. We're going to give them to the Ukrainians to use because, hell, it's like that old Total commercial. Give it to Mikey. He'll eat anything.
Right.
Give it to the Ukrainians. They'll do anything. But we're going to send them 90 missiles that are old, expired. They don't work. These are the older variants of the Patriot missile. And then we're taking the launch control units and the radars, which have been in storage for decades. These are the stuff that we sent over in 1991, in 2003. So we're talking 30-year-old equipment that we can't use anymore because it's expired. It's been in storage. We're bringing that out. We're sending it to Raytheon, and Raytheon's going to buff it up and make it look good and repair parts and get it functioning. And then we're going to send it in. But even refurbished, it's still 1990s, early 2000s technology that cannot shoot down a single modern Russian missile. So we're giving the Ukrainians over $2 billion worth of military equipment that Congress hasn't approved, but because there's no, funding required to acquire it, the Israelis are returning it. There is the issue of Raytheon and the refurbishment, and I would imagine there's existing contract vehicles to do that, so you don't have to go to Congress. But the bottom line is we're still sending equipment in. But here's it's not helping Ukraine. First of all, if Budanov is correct and there is no Ukraine by this summer, there won't be any place to ship these Patriot launchers because there won't be a Ukraine. But even if they arrive, what do the Ukrainians do? They receive a Patriot, they deploy it where it's most needed. And right now, there are energy facilities that need protection. Kiev itself needs protection. But the main thing that needs protection right now are the logistics hubs that receive material prior to being distributed to the front. And the Russians are very good at picking these things out and destroying them. Most of the equipment that gets sent into Ukraine gets destroyed before it gets to the front lines because it goes into a warehouse and then an Iskander missile comes in and blows it up. So the Ukrainians need to protect this. So they take these Patriot batteries, take the German Iris-Ts, and they take the Italian NASDMs and everything else, and they put them in and they deploy them. Now, I'm an old intelligence analyst. This is a trick that we used. The Israelis used it extensively. I learned this from the Israelis, actually. You look where the air defense is deployed. You plot out their range capabilities, and then you reverse engineer what they're protecting.
Yep.
What is it they're protecting? And so by receiving these Patriots and deploying these Patriots, the Ukrainians are actually making the Russian job easier. You see, the best way to get equipment into Ukraine is to forget about air defense and just move it around covertly. The Russians may get one warehouse, but you have 15 others that they didn't detect. But if you're going to consolidate into an area that's supposedly protected, you're making the targeting easier. And this is what the Ukrainians have been doing. They use their air defense, they deploy it, and the Russians reverse engineer it from an analytical standpoint, figure out what they're protecting, then do an analysis of the lines of communication feeding in, where the warehouses are, determining the size of the material, and they can pick out the warehouses that are most likely to contain the material. They monitor those, and the first hint they get of a truck backing in or something like that, boom, it's dead, and we make Ukraine weaker. So anybody who thinks that giving Ukraine $2 billion worth of expired Patriot capability strengthens Ukraine, it doesn't. It weakens Ukraine. In fact, every piece of aid that comes into Ukraine today makes Ukraine weaker. This is the reality. And it causes Ukraine to lose more troops. So Ukraine would be better off right now not receiving any more Western equipment, falling back on Soviet equipment, and falling back on their own tactics that they have mastered, as opposed to trying to learn new NATO tactics that require perfect communications, perfect fire support, none of which exists in Ukraine. And it just sets Ukraine up for failure, and they lose more men, and it hastens the end of this war.
And you got to add this 90 missiles. Well, I happen to know that pretty much all anti-aircraft systems, when firing, they fire 2 missiles per target to dramatically increase the probability of hitting it. That means you got 45 shots. Well, I mean, the Russians fire 45 drones, you know what I mean, before, a cup of coffee in the morning. That ain't going to last you long, number one. Number two, it emits radar. As soon as that damn thing turns on, if the Russians want to kill it, in comes a hypersonic missile and blows it. If they choose to kill it, it's gone. We're past the point where an old or a brand new one of these things would change anything. All right, something I wanted to toss at you next, Scott. Here we go. This is interesting. I'm reading it everywhere, and it's in the Financial Times, you name it. Ukrainska Pravda. They're having a little trouble with funds right now, but European officials have started discussing the idea of returning to gas purchases from Russia as part of a potential settlement of the war in Ukraine. Well, what's interesting is I've been reading lately that it's been a cold winter, the gas storage is running low, the price is going through the roof, the people of Europe are restive to be charitable, they are infuriated, probably be more accurate, and now to get a deal with Russia. Sure, yeah, maybe we should take a little bit of gas back from the Russians. Well, let me say this also. The Russians might have a say in that too. You might have to convince the Russians. In fact, as part of a deal, you don't have leverage over the Russians. You need that gas. They got no shortage of people that want to buy gas. So rather than you doing the Russians a favor or something to get a deal, I think they're going to end up begging the Russians for the, anyway, you make some sense of this, Scott.
Well, it's my understanding. There's people out there who are better qualified to talk about, global gas market, et cetera. But, the Russians do business based upon long-term supply contracts. So you supply and say what you want about the Russians. They don't violate their contracts. They assiduously adhere to the terms of the contract. The only time the Russians challenge or move away or do something different is when the other side violates the contract. And then based upon the contract, Russia is allowed to, to make amends, or do what it wants to do. But if you say you want to buy Russian gas, they set the price. There's no renegotiating. That's the contract price. And generally speaking, if you do a long-term contract with the Russians, you can get a discount, and you get the discount built in. And that's how Russia operates. And that's why Europe for decades had cheap Russian gas. When you cut off the Russian gas, as Europe has done, and you haven't solidified replacement contracts, you become a victim of what is known as the spot market.
Right.
And the spot market is what the market bears right now. And so let's just say that I'm Europe and I stupidly cut off my Russian gas supply. Well, the whole world was, when they start shipping out their LNG tankers and all that the Asians are buying and all this, the whole world is done that. Now Europe's going, I desperately need gas. So you have to divert resources, which means you have to break contracts, incur penalties. They move in, and now you're going to charge Europe the spot market price, which is whatever the hell you want it to be. And sometimes it's 5 times more, 8 times more, 10 times more than the cost they're paying, because that's what the market will bear. And Europe has been lurching along, paying spot market prices when there's a shortage of gas. And of course there'll be a shortage of gas because they don't have a long-term strategy on how to replace the cheap Russian gas. And I think Europe has finally realized that the reason why Volkswagen is up to sale for Chinese companies, and the reason why Michelin tires no longer produce tires, and the reason why the aluminum furnace, smelter no longer operates, and the reason why, there's deindustrialization is they can't afford it anymore because the price of gas is too expensive. So I think there's a recognition now that not only does this conflict have to end, but that Europe needs Russian gas. But as you said, Russia has found other markets. And understand, when this conflict ends, the sanctions end. And it's not just the direct sanctioning of Russia, but it's the secondary sanctions that are put on nations that purchase oil and gas from Russia. The freezing of the ability of Russia to ensure its primary tanker fleet caused Russia to go to this shadow tanker fleet, and now they're trying to target that. But Russia will find other ways to get around it because that's what Russia does. All those sanctions go away when this war ends. That's one of the Russian requirements. And when they go away, Russia will have solid alternative markets for its gas and oil. So it's not as though Russia will be saying, we have to come back to Europe. And so what you're seeing here is an act of desperation on the part of the Europeans saying, okay, if there's a peace deal with Ukraine, we have to have Russian gas. We have to have access to Russian gas. That has to be built into the plan. And Russia may go along with it, but understand that it will now be codified in a treaty. So it's not just going to be a contract, it's going to be a treaty, and there will be huge penalties built into that. The Russians are never again going to allow the West to arbitrarily withdraw from contracts and to disrupt Russian economy this way. So this is just proof positive that Europe is recognizing the scope and scale of their defeat in Ukraine. Because when they're after saying no Russian gas, no, we got to free ourselves from it, to come back and say no, we need Russian gas, but no, it has to be part of the peace deal, access to it. And look at the polls. The polls are like, we're going to blow up the pipelines before we let Russian gas return to Europe. And I mean, where does Poland think they're going to get fuel from Norway? I know they built that pipeline that comes in and connects to Norway, but all that. What happens when the Norwegians say no? What happens when Norway says we're just not going to supply to Poland anymore because Norway is part of a European Union that's made a strategic decision collectively that they need the Russian gas? Poland will find itself isolated. What about those pathetic little Baltic Chihuahua states that just bark all the time? What happens when all the off switches hit because they're trying to dictate outcomes to Europe that Europe's not willing to pay the price for? So this is a big deal. Everybody should be watching this with great interest.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, well, and I suspect the Russians are going to have their requirements. I mean, somebody's got paid for Nord Stream. And if I'm the Russians, I say, sure, we can get this deal together. But somebody blew up your Nord Stream and you wouldn't let us help investigate it. And then you investigated it for a year or 2 years and then said, we've suddenly determined that we don't have the authority to investigate it and we're not showing over anything. Fine. You pay for all of it if you want our gas. You're reimbursed us. You know what I mean? They've got leverage. Let me ask you
this. Did you see what the Danes did? Just to build up on that, the Danish government has now signed a contract or freed up Danish companies, part of the Nord Stream consortium, to go in and maintain segments of the destroyed pipeline so that if the pipeline's repaired, it can be, it can be brought back into service quickly. So, Europe's
writing's on the wall. Writing's on the wall. I think that they're preparing. Look, they're softening up the beachhead. They've gone from, yes, we'll never take Russian gas. And you know how it is. They're not just going to do a 180, or a 360 if you're Annalena Baerbock. They're going to, well, perhaps we should think about it. You know what I mean? And then well, maybe we will. And as they're preparing to do it, sounds to me like decisions have already been made. Now, here's another question. Trump says he wants out of Syria. I don't know if he did. What I recall is this. I recall reading in a number of outlets that when Trump went after he lost the election, that he gave an order. He said, get all the troops out of Syria and Iraq, and that the Pentagon just ignored them. Some people in the chat may recall. I read that. I don't know if it's 100% true. And I thought, well, if that's true, he's back. He don't want that. He don't want any of that crap. I think he's trying to come back in here and take Greenland and maybe Canada, some of the local stuff, and chill out and meet with the great powers and say, hey, you got yours. This is your region. We'll leave you alone. This is ours. A lot of problems I have with that, but I ain't Trump. Here's my point. What are your thoughts on what that means? The Israelis are apparently freaked out for a number of reasons, but getting out of Syria, which means it's probably also ain't no way he's leaving Syria and he ain't leaving Iraq, and some of those bases in the Middle East are going to close. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're correct. Trump did order the military to withdraw, and the military ignored the order. Not only that, they reinforced. Suddenly, they weren't able to, remember how many troops that went from 800 to 2,000. It was like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be withdrawing, you're reinforcing. They just ignored Trump. And Trump, again, has a thin skin and a long memory. And it's amazing. Recently, even under Biden, near the end, there, we were supposed to have around 800 troops in there, and suddenly overnight the Pentagon went, well, we just counted. There's over 2,000 troops in Syria. It's like, how did that happen, and why didn't we know about it? What's going on? Normally, I'm a big fan of getting Americans out of Syria. We shouldn't have been there. We were there. It's an illegal presence on Syrian soil. And it's an ongoing war crime because our troops are used to facilitate the theft of Syrian oil, which is a war crime. But the region has changed dramatically with the collapse of the Syrian government and the empowerment of HTS and likewise the empowerment of Turkey. And the United States needs to be careful now about a precipitous withdrawal that creates a power vacuum that sets in motion events that will be detrimental to American national security interests and the national security interests of our allies in the area. I'm not talking about staying in Syria forever. But what I would do if I were Donald Trump, again, if anybody's there, please listen to me because this will work. I would increase the number of troops in Syria, not decrease. I would solidify my position, and I would do it in a way that made sure that the Turks could not engage the Syrian Defense Forces, which is the modern name for the YPG, which is the Syrian equivalent of the PKK, which is a Kurdish terrorist group that we recognize as terrorists. That shows you how confusing things are. But solidify their position so that any Turkish attack against the SDF would be an attack against the United States of America. And I would tell the Turks that if you attack the United States of America, the full weight of American military power will come down on you. And, oh, by the way, we'll hit the kill switch on your economy. Because the Turkish economy is so over leveraged right now, the United States can kill it anytime we want to. And I would tell Erdogan, we recognize that you're a regional player and we recognize that you have a role to play and we're willing to give you most of what you want, but you don't get Kurdistan. You don't get to come in here and leverage that, because if we let you get Kurdistan in Syria, you're going to move into northern Iraq and you're going to take that too, because the same logic you have about why you need Syria, it's an historical injustice brought in by the French drawing an arbitrary line in 1921 in the Treaty of Lausanne. These territories belong to Anatolia proper, which was bequeathed to the Turkish Republic, and the French stole it. And they say the same thing about the British. The vilayet of Mosul and Kirkuk are part of Anatolia proper, belonging to Greater Turkey, and the British arbitrarily drew a line, and we had to go along with that at the time, but we find it historical wrong. If the United States withdraws from Syria, the Turks will move in and eradicate the Syrian Kurds, and then they'll move into northern Iraq and eradicate the Iraqi Kurds once and for all to solve that problem. It'll be a horrific humanitarian disaster. And there, what are we now going to rush back in to confront the Turks? The best way to avoid that is to set in motion up front formal agreements, treaties between the United States and Turkey on the withdrawal of American forces from Syria, where the Turks recognize the autonomy of this. The Syrian government then comes in and establishes a formal relation with the Kurds so that they aren't independent, they're part of Syria. We can do that if we have sufficient forces in there and we have the political will to say those forces stay there until we get the outcome we want. But if Trump just precipitously withdraws, there'll be a vacuum and the Turks will rush in. And when the Turks rush in, this is going to create a huge problem because the Israelis themselves have stopped talking about, the Iran project. We got to bomb Iran, bomb Iran, da-da-da. They're right now saying, Iran, we're not so worried about anymore. Turkey is what we're worried about. And the thing is, if Turkey ever gets a common border with Israel, that's going to lead to a direct conflict between Turkey and Israel. It's almost a guaranteed outcome. So we need to ensure that doesn't happen. And so we need to maintain some level of influence. We can't just withdraw and pretend that we have influence. We have influence now because we have a military presence both in Syria and Iraq. If we withdraw from Syria, U.S. troops are leaving Erbil post haste. And that will be the end of the American presence in Iraq. Again, from Trump's perspective, this is a good thing. From my personal perspective, this is a good thing, but it can't be done precipitously. If we withdraw, we have to ensure that the mechanisms of stability have been put in place, and this requires diplomacy, negotiations that can't be had from a position of weakness. Right now in Syria, we have thousands of troops that nobody can remove. So why remove them until we get that which we need? And it's not irresponsible or unrealistic to talk about securing a Kurdish autonomy for lands that are populated by the Turks, but do it in a way that doesn't threaten Turkey, in a way that integrates them more effectively into Syria. But we can't do that if we just withdraw our troops and then think we're going to make those demands. So I personally don't think it's a smart move right now to remove American troops from Syria. I think we should reinforce and then engage diplomatically to create the conditions that are conducive to the withdrawal of these troops without creating a power vacuum that leads to further conflict.
This is the prime example of be careful what you pray for, you might just get it. You know, the Israelis wanted the fall of Assad and the fall of Syria. Now they've got it, but they got a bigger problem. And that is, in the same way that they want a greater Israel, hey, Erdogan sitting over there thinking about the Ottoman Empire. You know what I mean? So you've created an unstable plot of land that happens to have oil in a lot of areas that you can buy, that you can grow wheat. And so now, in the same way the Israelis are eyeing it, the Turks are eyeing it, who knows, you know what I mean? So you've created on your border a situation where somebody else wants to fight for it. And if they get close to you, you're not the best of friends with them, you know? So they wanted Syria all along to fall. Now that it's fallen, they got a problem they have to deal with. You know, in the same way, let me add this. The U.S. wanted to, and Germany and these other countries wanted to destabilize Ukraine. Well, now they're going to end up with the same thing. You end up with a land on your border that's unstable. And now it's, well, the Russians say, we're taking this part of it. We took it, we're keeping it. Well, you know, the Hungarians are going to look in the mountains and they're going to say they're pissed because the Ukrainians were grabbing a whole bunch of Hungarians who didn't want to fight, throwing them into the front lines. The Poles are going, hey, Galicia, look at this. Is that, you know what I mean? You've created this same dynamic by destabilizing these two regions. And now everybody wants a slice of the pie, Scott.
Yeah. You know, one thing that we are very bad at is we're very good at starting wars. We're better than anybody else in the world at starting a war. We're horrible at finishing a war. And it goes back to, I mean, we could talk about Korea. We can talk about Vietnam. We can talk about the Gulf War, where we won the war, but we fumbled the finish because we lost focus of what we went to war for, to liberate Kuwait. And instead it became to facilitate regime change in Iraq. And when we failed to do that, we got trapped in a decade-long, you know, chaos in the region until we finally invaded Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein. But we didn't know what we wanted to replace him. We didn't even think it through. State Department wasn't allowed to think it through. And so we went in and we just screwed it up. We got rid of Gaddafi in Libya without any clue what was going to take place. And now look at Libya. It's an absolute disaster. And, you know, now Assad has fallen. We've been trying to get Assad out of the picture for 14 years. And we finally did it, but we didn't have a plan. Nobody had a plan. Nobody thought HTS was going to do this. The Turks, by the way, you know, this Syrian National Army, they had a government in exile in Turkey that, you know, a bunch of fat guys who eat baklava every day and, you know, dribble, you know, doner kebab on their ties. They were all asleep when Syria fell, and they all woke up and tried to, and HTS went, nah, we got this one. You don't get to play. So Turkey lost control, and we have a problem in Syria. The same thing, we talked about this earlier in Ukraine. I would advise Donald Trump to do whatever necessary to get the head of the Rada to be recognized as the legitimate government of Ukraine. Why? Because then we can end the conflict where we actually have a plan on how it's going to end and all that, as opposed to just having this giant vacuum where the Russians are dictating every outcome and we have no say. And this is, you know, this is very much the case in Syria today. We don't know who's in charge. This is why I don't want to withdraw. I'm not supporting withdrawing troops from Kurdistan, because what's going to happen? What's the outcome? We're very bad at ending wars, and that's manifest today. And Trump needs to be careful because he has he is wired right now to get America out of these entangling conflicts. But it's the hard part isn't withdrawing the troops. That's the easy part. The hard part is determining what's going to replace in a new reality that is created when we withdraw the troops. And that requires a lot of vision. That requires diplomacy that we haven't been exercising for years. What happens in South Korea? I mean, I can guarantee you that Trump isn't going to continue past practice of these exercises with South Korea, these deliberately provocative, massive airwave attacks, simulated attacks against North Korea, which was nothing more than regime change. One day, if they don't end, those planes aren't going to stop, and they're going to continue on, and they'll be over Pyongyang in a matter of minutes, dropping bombs, probably nuclear bombs, in a decapitation strike. And then the North Koreans trigger their automatic response, and Tokyo's gone, Seoul's gone, the whole world's at war. We fire our ballistic missiles to take out North Korea, but oh my God, those Minuteman III, they overfly Russia. And Russia, of course, isn't going to trust when you have 50 Minuteman IIIs coming over their territory. They're going to think it's a preemptive strike, so they're going to launch a retaliatory strike, and then we all die. And so, Trump is wants to get out of that, but I mean, I don't know if the American people have woken up to the fact the South Korean president tried to impose martial law, and part of his plan was a false flag attack by South Korean special forces to simulate a North Korean attack in order to generate a conflict between South Korea and North Korea that would be used to justify martial law. Why did he do this? I think because the South Korean parliament was starting to look at the corruption of his wife. So we almost all died in a nuclear war because South Korea's wife, the president's wife, was a corrupt lady. Look at the vacuum that happened. If we withdraw the troops, what happens in South Korea? South Korea has been little more than a military dictatorship with a facade of democracy thrown over it that gets replaced every now and then when the military wants it replaced. It's not a democracy. It's not a functioning democracy. What happens when our troops pull out? The vacuum that's created, the danger that's created there. Trump wants to disengage in the world, but the world's a very complicated place. Sometimes when you deal with an old vehicle, people say, let the rust, leave the rust. Let the grease stay there. Don't clean the engine. Why? Because if you clean the engine, all the things that have been gritted in there that keep the engine running, not effectively, but keep the engine running, they go away and the engine starts blowing steam and holes and leaks and it dies. Right now I tell Donald Trump, don't start cleaning the world until you have a new engine ready to replace the one, because you clean it and it's not going to function anymore. We live in a very dangerous world, and that the danger Trump has recognized. Remember, last September, he gave a speech in Dallas where he talked about the greatest threat to the world today is America and how we interface with the world. And he wants to change that. But America's been interfacing with the world like this since the end of the Second World War. The rules-based international order is that grease and that dirt and that grime that holds the world together. He wants it to collapse, but he doesn't have something to replace it with. And the danger of creating that vacuum is that there is something that's ready to step in. That's called BRICS. And he's not ready to deal with BRICS. And so I think Trump would be better served by having a gradual drawdown, as opposed to just rushing and trying to do everything precipitously because I'm Donald Trump and I can do it. Look at the mistakes he made with Colombia. People tend to forget that last year in 2024, the Biden administration, I think, had 145 deportation flights to Colombia. We've been pumping out illegal immigrants to Colombia for a long time now. It's nothing new. And there's never been a problem with it. But Trump wanted to come in and be different. So he put them on C-17 transports and handcuffed them and had them escorted like they were prisoners. And the Colombian president took a look at a plane landing in Brazil, saw the guys come off under military guard with handcuffs, and he went, that ain't going to happen. So he turned the planes around. Now, there were subsequent threats of trade war, et cetera, negotiations. But now, the guys are coming. Some of them are coming on C-17s, but they're not handcuffed anymore, and they're not escorted by military personnel. They're escorted by civilian personnel. And so there's a perception of dignity applied. You see, if he had done that up front, he would have avoided the whole clash. And this is Donald Trump's problem, is he's trying to impose things on people without talking to them first. You will find around the world that if we simply engage with them and tell them what we want to happen, they'll work with us to make it happen the way we want it to happen, but it'll be done in a way that doesn't create tectonic shifts of political tension. That Trump hasn't learned that lesson yet.
Let me add this, because I saw some people in the chat saying, oh, Scott wants to keep troops in foreign lands. let me use a term that we don't use in the US. You know, if you read the Chinese media, and you know this, you read the Russian media, there's a term that their diplomats use constantly: stability. Right? Stability. You got something there. If you yank the rug out, it suddenly becomes unstable and unpredictable. You don't know what happens. Oh, we got 90 million, 1,000 million troops in this country. Pull them out today. You create an instability. You don't know what's going to happen. Here are my thoughts. If the US, and I want the troops out of wherever, out of Korea, the big player in that region is China. I think you have to talk to China. I think you have to talk to North Korea. The Russians now have a border there too. They got a border with North Korea. I think you got to talk to the regional power players and say, look, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to work. You got to talk to the North Koreans. We're going to set up this. You're going to have the problem I think they got with this guy, the guy that attempted to dictator, listening to Jake Sullivan. It was clear that Jake Sullivan was in on that. They're like asking Jake Sullivan, what do you think about that? He's like, oh, well, how about those Bears? Huh? I think they're going to have a good team next year. You know, it was obvious that it was in it. My point being, yes, it sounds good to just say we're getting out of everywhere. But the Russians, the Chinese, you listen to the Iranians, you listen to the civilizations that have been around for 1,000 years, and they ain't going to talk about domination, influence, or control. What they respect and want is stability. And you can now say, this is how I think you should involve the Iranians in the discussion with Syria and et cetera. You know what I mean? So that you can turn down the volume slowly and you can leave these countries stable. Because if you just walk out, there will be evil forces that want to take over. And there will be people that fight for control, and that can get ugly at times. So I think what you're talking about is maintaining stability and working with the power players in the region to turn down the volume and to exit with leave something stable where everybody knows what you have. When you leave, okay, you've had an issue with a dictator. The people with a attempted dictator, the people in Korea know the Americans are leaving. The last American leaves May 31st. June 15th, we're going to have a election. You know what I mean? And they've got a roadmap, the people in Korea, and it's been agreed with the Chinese, and they're going to make sure that your economy doesn't suddenly collapse. Because that, you know what I'm getting at, Scott?
Yeah, look, let's take Korea. I want U.S. troops out of Korea. There's no doubt about that. But if we precipitously withdraw, we're probably facilitating a conflict between North and South Korea. Because I want to remind everybody, they're still at war. The war's never ended. So why not meet with Kim Jong-un and say, our goal is a stable Korean Peninsula, not necessarily unified. That's between you two. We're not going to impose unification on that. But we'd like to ratchet down the military aspect of that. And we won't be comfortable leaving South Korea until there's a peace treaty that, is ratified in place, and that there are security guarantees attached to it, which include China and Russia, so that China and Russia are vested in, peace on the Korean Peninsula. And that's the negotiating base. But if we just pull our troops out, then we don't know we can control the outcome. Look, it's like a bar fight. If I'm in a bar and I'm trying to drink my beer in peace, and somebody comes over and starts to pick a fight with me for whatever reason, and we end up in a wrestling match, and I've got him pinned down. Now, do I escalate and continue to punch, inviting police presence and all this stuff, or do I say, I'm going to let you go, but before I let you go, we're agreeing on certain things. I'm going to stand up, sit down at the bar, and I'm going to finish my drink. When I finish my drink, I'm going to pay my bill, and I'm going to leave, and you will never see me again. When I let you go, you're going to get up and go to the other end of the bar and finish doing what you're doing. You can stay. I don't care. But we've discussed this. Does everybody agree? Bartender, bouncer, everybody agree. I'm going to let go. He's going to get up. That's a negotiated end to this. Or I can just release him without any talk and get up, and he's going to stand up and bam, cold cock me again. You have to have an agreed upon set of circumstances that are going to engender stability. And if so, yeah, I mean, you guys can be critical of me all you want. I don't care. I'm not a policymaker, first of all, so I don't take any of this personally. I'm just somebody who wants peace and stability in the world today. And unfortunately, we live in a world where America has positioned itself in a very aggressive posture that promotes instability, and we want to disengage. But we can't just release the guy we're in a bar fight with. There has to be agreed upon conditions before this so that there's stability when we end up leaving, or else we're just going to find ourselves in a bar fight again. And I don't want to be in a bar fight. I want our American troops to come home. I don't want them to be pulled out and suddenly have to be reinserted because the whole world went to hell. And now we find ourselves in a bigger war where we have more American troops with uncertainty, death, destruction, the whole works. Peace and stability. We have a military presence that we intend to give up. But we can't just pull out precipitously. There has to be conditions attached to our withdrawal that facilitate long-term stability.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing I'll say, because I know we don't have so much time. So whatever time you got to answer this, Europe, it has become so unstable. I'm looking at the UK, and people in the UK now, I forgot, every so many minutes somebody leaves. People are leaving the country because of the economic instability and the totalitarian nature of the government. They're locking people up just for saying stuff. This is going, the German government, extremely unstable. You know, they're going after Maloney now. There's just the instability, the political instability in Europe is incredible. I think that's one of the reasons they're starting to think about taking gas again, because they know they're in big trouble. Your final comment, because I always bring this up, the very beginning of the conflict, you came on my radio show with Dr. Wilmer Leon and said, these governments are going to fall. That when this thing ends, not one of these governments that support this crap are going to fall. Your thoughts on the instability of Europe as we get out?
Look, I'm somebody who believes that the European Union is not long for this world. Look, Donald Trump is already, for right or wrong, understand this: the United States, whether you love us or you hate us, I don't care. I really don't. We exist. I'd like us to do a better job, but we exist. We created the conditions that created the European Union, and the European Union existed because it facilitated our vision of what needed to happen in Europe. That vision sustained a rules-based international order that created far more problems than it solved. And the failure of the international rules-based order led to the creation of BRICS and the tightening of relations between Russia and China, et cetera. Trump has rightly said that's the problem. He has come out and said, I'm freezing relations with the European Union, and I'm going to deal with Europe based upon relations with independent states. That's the end of the European Union. It won't survive. NATO
and everything. That is an informal comment that says, I consider NATO dead. That's what that says to me. I'm not going to deal with you in any umbrella organizations. I don't like them. I'll talk to you individually. Let me add this. That's what Vladimir Putin said about a year or two ago.
Yeah, but
exactly. You remember that?
Yeah, but Trump can't say that because he's accused of being a Putin puppet.
No, I mean, but I mean, Putin said, I will talk to them individually.
Right.
That is not just an acknowledgement because he's the president of the United States. That is a pronouncement. I consider the EU and NATO dead.
Right. Well, the NATO, the problem is we don't have a treaty relationship with the European Union. So its death means nothing to us. NATO, we are in a treaty relationship. And so it is important on how we kill NATO, and we will be the ones killing NATO. Let there be no doubt about that. And I think Trump is clever here. He put the 2%, enforcement of the 2% GDP on his last term, and barely any of them made that. He's now saying 5%. There's only a handful that can make the 5%, but he's also saying that 5% is if you want America to continue to invest. But the terms of this investment are, first of all, we're going to withdraw 20,000 troops from Europe. There's no reason for the United States to have 100,000 troops positioned forward, deployed in Poland, looking as if we're pretending to go to war against Russia. We're going to pull 20,000 troops out. if you want the others, and this is to Poland, who's been so happy to bring the American troops in, come in, build more bases, come in, keep coming, more bases. And Trump's going to go, yeah, you got to pay for all that now. If you want to keep American troops, you pay the whole price. And you have to also have a 5% increase. They can't. And so this will lead to the conditions of American withdrawal, which now for NATO to survive without America means that the defense spending has to go up to 10 to 15%. Not a single NATO nation can make that, which means NATO becomes unsustainable and Europe has to look to different security frameworks, which is what Russia's been talking about all along, a new European security framework. I think you're going to see at the end of the day, Russia's going to get everything it wanted because of the fact that Europe, the European Union, and NATO are unsustainable entities that only furthered a school of thought from America that's no longer in vogue. Trump is something different. Now, is Trump a 4-year flash in the pan? Can the establishment just hunker down and wait? Maybe. But I think that the reality is that, Trump has a vice president, J.D. Vance, who's not a rhino, a Republican in name only, who's not a Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham Republican. He is MAGA. And for better or worse, MAGA is a political reality. And if J.D. Vance is successful in taking the reins, he can rule for 8 years. And then if he's successful in picking a quality vice president, I don't know, Tulsi Gabbard, she could rule for, you're looking at 20 years potential of MAGA. And during that time, the establishment can be totally collapsed, rethought, relationships reimagined, and things of that nature. And that will be the end of any hope of reviving these legacy alliances that have no reason to exist today. So I think we are looking at the end of NATO. We're looking at the end of the European Union, and we're looking at Europe compelled to come up with a new European security framework that isn't contingent upon America's overwhelming investment in the security of Europe. This is why you have Europeans now talking about we need gas. What's the irony? The Cold War mentality. Europe can't have Russian gas because it gives Russia leverage over Europe. The new world mentality: Europe needs Russian gas because Russia isn't going to invade the people that they're customers with. Russia's not going to invade Europe anyway, so don't worry about it. But the world is changing. This is revolutionary. Toes will be stepped upon. Egos will be hurt. Mistakes will be made. Wars will be fought. But we are, I think, seeing that there is going to be tectonic shifts in geopolitical reality that are going to take place over the next 4, 8, 12 years. The United States will be at the middle of it. It will be redefining America's relationship with the world. Is it going to succeed? I don't know. In fact, if I were Vegas odds man, I'd have a hard time saying 50-50 right now. I still think Trump is going up against an uphill battle, but he's committed to the fight. And I'll just to show you how difficult the Trump vision is to implement. And I'll finish with this: Panama Canal. Trump has said, I'm taking the Panama Canal, and he's going to take the Panama Canal. We're going to invade and we're going to take the Panama Canal. There's no doubt in my mind that will happen. And that's going to create a lot of problems, a lot of instability, a lot of friction that doesn't need to be created. Why is he taking the Panama Canal? China. He's exaggerated the role that China's playing there. They're pretending that China somehow is in control of the canal. They can shut it down when they want to. American shipping will be locked down and all that. But this is what Donald Trump, and again, anybody in there that's from Trump circle, listen to me and give me a call. I can help you here. Let's look at what China's doing. China's not making a move on the Panama Canal. China could care less. I mean, they've got some Hong Kong-based port management companies that are in there, earning a living. China just invested several $1 billion in building a super port in Peru, a super port. This thing takes massive ships full of containers. You guys have seen the photographs of the big ships on the sea loaded with containers. We bring them into Long Beach and our guys go on strike. It overwhelms the system. We can't handle that many containers. Peru now can. They bring in these containers, they offload them, and then they get on a high-speed rail line that China's building to connect Peru with Brazil. And so now all these containers make it to the other side of the South American continent, which means they can get to Brazil quicker using the port and the high-speed rail than they could going through the Panama Canal, navigating the Gulf of America, up through, going around the corner of South America and down to Brazil. They'll be there weeks in advance of this. Of this. That's what China's done. They've made the Panama Canal irrelevant. And Trump needs to realize that you don't need to invade the Panama Canal. What you need to do is figure out how you're going to adapt to this new reality of high-speed rail, cargo shipping, et cetera. What are you going to do to tap into that? Because, what's the old adage? If you can't beat them, join them. I'd be looking at finding out how we can, get some connectivity. I'd be going to Brazil right now and seeing how we can get in on the end game, the distribution, how we can control that so they won't cede that front to China as well. There are things we can be doing that are productive, constructive, and lead to a better world. Invading the Panama Canal is not one of them.
And I'll say this, I think that the South Korean guy, when he starts facing like the firing squad or something, is going to sing. I think he's going to say, I got put up to this. Jake Sullivan and Blinken told me they had my back, blah, blah, blah. And I also think this, man, Tucker Carlson said that the Biden people tried to kill Putin. I believe there are things that are going to come out that will be shocking to the conscious, that these people were friggin' nuts, that we came this close to getting fried with nukes a dozen times and didn't know it, and that the things that they did and plotted were so evil, so unthinkable, that it will be hard not to prosecute these people. First of all, if they tried to kill Putin, that's an act of war, which only Congress can authorize an act of war, but it wouldn't have mattered because we'd all have been dead immediately. You get the last word, Scott.
The National Security Archive just published a document from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff back in the 60s about Operation Northwood.
Right.
People have known about this, but this document is because it wasn't just a CIA plot. This was the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States military planning a false flag attack on American shipping in Cuba to justify an invasion of Cuba. That's a crime, straight up crime, criminal act. I think when the history of the Biden administration is told, we're going to see, especially in the final year of the non-functioning brain of Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken have committed huge crimes against the American people and against humanity, that the CIA has done things that if we were aware of it, we'd be demanding the CIA be shut down today. That Homeland Security has done things, that the FBI has done things. We became a lawless nation in order to sustain the establishment's hold on power. And I Donald Trump, was talking about releasing the JFK files. I mean, come on, that's of interest, but it doesn't change anything. The Martin Luther King files, it's of interest, but it doesn't change anything.
We all know they killed all of those people. Everybody knows that. Go ahead.
Release the Blinken and Sullivan files. If you want to get the American people's attention, release the Blinken. And here's the important part. You will have to arrest half of the Democrats in Congress who openly conspired with the Biden administration to violate the constitutional due processes which are required by law on how this government functions, checks and balances, et cetera. The collusion between the Adam Schiffs and the Chuck Schumers and all this to allow Blinken and Sullivan to assume power over a brain dead president and get us involved in crazy schemes that could include, I don't know if Tucker Carlson's information is correct, so I can't embrace it, but could include a plan to assassinate the president of Russia that would take us immediately to thermonuclear warfare where we all die. I mean, this is insanity. America, I know you're not happy. A lot of people aren't happy with Donald Trump being president. I'm not happy with a lot of things he's doing, but we dodged a bullet here. The Biden administration was hell bent on destroying everything because of their hatred to Donald Trump, of Donald Trump. And I think we need to know about this. I think we need to learn about this. I think when that happens, the purges that Trump's going to be taking suddenly make more sense. Why is it important to have Kash Patel at the FBI? Because the FBI is the enemy of the United States of America. The National Security Division has been attacking the Constitution for some time now, but accelerated these attacks under the Biden administration. The Department of Justice is not the Department of Justice, it's the Department of Injustice. Pam Bondi needs to clean house, Kash Patel needs to clean house, but people will say, well, that's just political. That's just Trump getting his revenge. No, it's necessary to fix this country, because this country is fundamentally broken. When we have a system that allows a coup d'etat against a sitting president right in our face, removing him as the candidate, replacing him with Kamala Harris without any democratic due process, and then seizing control of the national defense and national security levers of power without going through congressional review and congressional approval, bypassing the Department of Defense on critical issues such as, can Ukraine use ATACMS missiles against Russian targets? This almost killed us as a nation, almost killed all of us as people. It almost destroyed humanity. We can't allow that system to ever rise up again. That system must be destroyed. It's going to be ugly, but I think it's imperative that the Trump team inform the American people why they're doing what they're doing, about the dangers that were posed by this establishment. And that will require people to be arrested. Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, maybe even Lindsey Graham. Knock on wood, that'd be nice.
How about this? Whoever the hell was responsible for that damn Merit vets, that has to be investigated.
Yeah.
Who knew that and funded and okay, because that came through the State Department, a website that put American senators, American veterans on a website and said, we want them dead, who put foreign nationals on a website. Americans basically has a website that we're supporting that says we want to kill people in Russia and then kill them and then celebrate them.
Put children on websites.
Children
in the Donbass, teenagers who simply were raising questions saying, why is this war happening? Mir Tvorets said, you're going to die. We're going to kill you. And they tried to kill them. But it's not just Mir Tvorets. Mir Tvorets gets in the murky world of intelligence. How about the Center for Countering Disinformation? That is an element that works for the president of Ukraine, totally conceived and funded by the United States of America. Its initial meetings were attended by State Department officials and officials from the embassy, where they published a blacklist that contained 76 Americans, myself included, Tulsi Gabbard included, and said, we are information terrorists. You know what my crimes were? The top 3 crimes I had. One, that the war is it's a NATO proxy war. That apparently earned me the death penalty. Trump just said it. So I guess Trump is going to be killed too.
Seth Moulton, he's got to go too. He said
but it wasn't within a month after I said this, the defense minister of Ukraine came here and said, this is a NATO, that we are a proxy of NATO fighting. We are fighting NATO's fight again. Wait a minute. I'm going to be killed because I said that. But now that was it. Bucha was the Ukrainians killed the people in Bucha. They did. Everybody knows they did. The British knows. Everybody. The lie is falling apart. But I was sentenced to death over that one. And then I basically the stance I have that the Ukrainian government is a proxy for the far right, the neo-Nazis, the Azov Brigade. I got marked for death for that too. They said that the people on this list, this isn't Mir Tvorets, this is the State Department funded and authorized list. The 76 Americans that are on that list should be treated as information terrorists,
yes,
who are the equivalent of real terrorists, and that all of the means available to deal with terrorism that the United States and the world have put in place prior to that should be applied to this. And the State Department okayed it, agreed to it. The FBI's legal attaché in Kiev received information from the Center for Countering Disinformation that led to the FBI launching a raid on my house. Let me say that one more time so you understand this, ladies and gentlemen. The United States Congress, Chuck Schumer, authorized money to be given to the Ukrainian government to create the Center for Countering Disinformation, which then, with American approval, issued a blacklist that put people like myself and Tulsi Gabbard on that list. And then using this framework, their intelligence services would report to the FBI saying Scott Ritter represents a threat to Ukraine. The FBI reported back to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice then authorized the FBI to raid my house. If that's how you think America should work, get the hell out of America. This is the apparatus that must be dismantled. The attorney general that signed off on that in the Northern District should be fired, investigated, prosecuted if necessary. Every FBI agent that came into my house should be brought in and counseled. And if they're not willing to accept the counseling, they should be kicked out of the FBI. They should not be allowed to have a badge because they knew they fabricated a probable cause that went before a judge. They lied about what they thought they were going to find in this house because they knew they weren't. They came in with files this thick because they've been monitoring my emails and my phone calls for 2 years. They admitted it. And I said, then what the hell do you want my computer for? What do you want my phone for? You've monitored everything. Why are you doing this? To intimidate me, to make me scared, to make me afraid, to make me bad. And I told them, I said, you picked the wrong Marine. You picked the wrong Marine. I don't get intimidated. I don't back down. If you want a war, you got a war. And now I have actual weapons. I have 2 presidential executive orders that talk about freedom of speech and defending, preventing the FBI from infringing on freedom of speech and not using the government to be weaponized against people who speak out against the government. And now we're going to have people, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard in place. Tulsi Gabbard, who is on that list. If you think for a second that the director of national intelligence is just going to let that one slide, think again. This is the enemy we're fighting, ladies and gentlemen. This is the truth about what was going on with this war in Ukraine. This was a war against the American people. This was a war against democracy. This was a war against free speech. The proxy conflict wasn't just against Russia. It was being used by the United States to attack Americans. I've been traveling to Switzerland, going to attend this fantastic conference. I don't know if I can go to Switzerland anymore because they just arrested a journalist who landed there. Europe's gone insane. I've been invited to go by German Parliament to visit Germany in March, to go to Berlin and speak to parliamentarians. I don't know if I want to do that because Germany has gone insane. I don't know if I ever want to go to Europe again because Europe has gone insane.
Yep.
That's what was happening in America. The British thought police, where you put something online and you say, I think Israel sucks. Boom, knock, knock, knock. Yep, you're going to jail. Now, you can rape kids, you can have a pedophile ring, and nothing happens. But, oh my God, you put a meme up on your social media that's critical of Israel, handcuffs, off the jail, 7-year sentences. This was what's going to happen in America. This isn't just about Scott Ritter. It's not just about the Uhura 3. It's about every one of you. That was the direction this country was heading. This is why this fight is so important.
Yeah, I think a lot of people should start writing and demanding an investigation. You know, if you remember, Wyatt Reed was in Donbass and he was on their list. He went somewhere, dinner or whatever. When he came back, an artillery round had hit his hotel right where he was. And he was told, yeah, they're probably trying to kill it. You know what I mean? I think there needs to be some investigations. If I remember correctly, didn't you write a letter or a demand or something to the governor? But I want to know about you, something you had a right to do.
Sure. I wrote
they wouldn't even answer it.
The only one in answer is Paul Tonko, because I wrote to Congress. Because remember, Schumer is the Senate. The power of the purse is controlled by the House. And It was Tonko's vote. And what I got was a form letter, and I've kept it because I'm going to eventually put it in his face. And it's just a form letter about how Ukraine is wonderful. We're fighting for democracy. He never addressed any of the issues. I'm a constituent. And Paul Tonko, maybe one of your staff will listen to this. You son of a bitch. You voted for money that was given to the Ukrainians to have me killed. To have me, a constituent, killed. This isn't a game, ladies and gentlemen. This is real. The Ukrainians assassinate people. Right? Wyatt Reed was targeted. I was allegedly targeted when I was in Crimea by the people running the Mirotvorets list and the Center for Countering Disinformation. They didn't like it that I was in Crimea because, my God, I might actually talk to people and find the truth out about Crimea. So they wanted to shut it down. And when they failed to kill me in Crimea, they went to the U.S. government and told the U.S. government, you have to shut him down. He can't be allowed to travel. You know, I went to Crimea, I went to Kherson, I went to Zaporizhia, I went to Donetsk, I went to Lugansk. I met with governors, I met with people, and then I wrote articles that told the truth about this. And the Ukrainians can't handle the truth. Neither can the U.S. government. So next thing you know, they pull my passport and then they raid my house. Why? Because this isn't about free speech anymore, ladies and gentlemen. It's about the United States government imposing its will on the American people and eliminating free speech. Two terms, legal terms that have been redefined under the Biden administration, and Trump addressed them in his executive order. Misinformation, no, disinformation. If I told you disinformation, one would say logically, well, that means it's wrong information. You're creating false information, etc. No, the new legal definition of disinformation, this came out in the Uhura 3 trial. Disinformation isn't wrong information. Disinformation can be factually correct. Disinformation is information that goes against official U.S. policy. My God, why do we have a free press? Go back and read the whole justifications for a free press. Read the Supreme Court's opinion on the New York Times versus the United States about the Pentagon Papers, why we have a free press. It's to call out the lies of government. When the government lies, we need a free press to call it out. It is the duty and responsibility of every American to do that. I did that, and the U.S. government turned on me and said, no, you're a threat. No, I'm not a threat. You're a threat. So disinformation, now the new definition is it can be factually correct and be honest and be truthful. But if it goes against official American policy, it's treated as disinformation and it's prosecutable. Another term, malinformation. Mal, I'm not a Latin expert, means bad, I think. Mal, bad. So it means bad information. It should mean false information, misleading. No. And this came out in RFK Jr.'s interaction with the U.S. government. Malinformation is information that can be factually correct, etc., but it's inconvenient to the United States of America. Inconvenient. Do you see what's happening here? We are losing control of our country. And the thing that keeps us in control is democracy, but democracy requires a free press so that we, the constituents, can be informed about the issues at hand so we can make informed decisions to vote properly and hold people accountable. That's the last thing the establishment wanted to happen. We were headed straight down a highway to hell. So all you people out there saying, well, how could Kash Patel? How can you allow the FBI to continue to exist the way it does today? How can you allow the Department of Justice to exist? How can you allow the State Department? How can you allow any of this edifice of anti-democratic behavior to exist? It's unconstitutional. I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And right now, the greatest domestic threat to the Constitution of the United States is the FBI, is the Department of Justice. It is the deep state that has entrenched itself. Donald Trump says he wants to root them out. God bless Donald Trump. Get rid of them.
Everybody go to scottritter.com. That's scottritter.com, where you can follow all of Scott's work. Additionally, you can go to scottritter.com and you can donate. Please donate if you can't afford it to help Scott with his good work and traveling and all the stuff he has to do. He's got a couple of barking dogs there, and they sound hungry, and we don't want them to starve to death. They'll chew up the furniture, for God's sake. And we can't have yeah, exactly. So scottritter.com. Share all the stuff share the website so other people know about it on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot, Scott. And I know you got to run, so I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, we're going to go over the questions and the super chats, you all, and I'll talk about we'll answer all of those. I appreciate everybody with all of that stuff. It's going to take a few minutes, but we always get lots of good questions from all the super chats. So let's do it. The Sparkster. Scott, is Trump coming back for a second term? Kind of like Eastwood's character coming back in the movie High Plains Drifter. Trump will be like 82. I don't think that's going to happen. That's it's not only that, you got constitutional issues there. Not going to happen, but thanks a lot there, Sparkster. Sparkster says, denazify Ukraine. I think that's what the Russians are doing on the battlefield, believe it or not. Sparkster says, make Ukraine Russia again. Don't leave a rump state called Ukraine, lest it remain a NATO playground, a carpetbagger's money laundry, and a BlackRock property. You got that right on the money there, brother Sparkster. How about Sparksters on a roll? President Biden had corn pop. President Trump has General Kellogg's corn flake. That's a good one. Corn Pop was a bad dude, man. Corn Pop was a bad dude, if in fact he existed, which we all know. Corn Pop. First of all, what kind of he was implying that Corn Pop was the implication was he was a black dude from the hood and he had a nickname Corn Pop. Trust me when I tell you this, ain't no brother's nicknamed Corn Pop. I know all kind of black. I know skinny guys that were nicknamed String Bean. I knew when I grew up, we had a skinny guy and we nicknamed him Chubby. All kinds of nicknames. Corn Pop just ain't gonna get it done. There's no fool like an old fool, applies to General Kylov. Thanks a lot, Sparks. Man, Sparks are just rolling, ain't he? At least Trump knows piss and countries are inconsequential when planning the big picture. That is quite true. Man, that Sparkster's rolling. Syria was effectively already collapsed a couple of years before the recent invasion. U.S. needs to let Syria be Erdogan's cross to bear. Maybe, I don't know. Again, what is we talk about? You listen to the Russians, listen to the Chinese, listen to the Iranian foreign ministers, right? Listen to these countries that have been around for 1,000 years. And what do they always use? The word they use is stability. They're looking for stability. It's stable in their region. They know what's going on. If there's a glitch in the matrix, the power players can stop in and ease it up. So they want stability. And that's what we're looking for. F Israel, according to the Sparkster, here we got, man, Sparkster's dominating the scene. Anytime someone says Israel is our only friend in the Middle East, I can't help but think before Israel, we had no enemies in the Middle East. John Sheehan, that's one that we will not forget. Kurd should know by now what it means to be a friend of the U.S. That's right. It is fatal. By the way, you guys, don't forget, we have a join button now. So you can click on the join button and you can become a member. I think it's like $4.99 a month or something, $4.99 a month. Keep in mind, Israel's killed many more Americans than Iran. Remember the USS Liberty. How about that? They have cost the lives of a lot of Americans with their antics. Build a better world with BRICS, says the Sparkster. Man, this is all about the Sparkster. Why stop Erdogan in Syria? Let the Neo-Ottoman Empire be his region of influence. Well, you know what he wants. He wants the Syrian part with the oil and the wheat. He wants the northern Iraq because there's a lot of oil. So, yeah, I don't know. Don't let everyone run everything. Let the Syria should go back and let the Syrian people choose. That's what I got to say, Sparkster. If not for 9/11, the EU would have dissolved years ago. You know what's interesting? You notice this. So here's what we hear. We've got to investigate all these things that happened in the 60s. You know what you don't hear? We've got to investigate 9/11. For some reason, we're going to look into MLK, RFK, JFK, you name it. We can look into all of these CIA things. What about 9/11? No, I think we better talk about that one. It's a little too recent. Maybe 80 years from now, they'll look back and they'll say, holy crap, it was an inside job. Maybe not. I'm just saying, isn't it noticeable? Isn't it remarkable? The dog that didn't bark, as they say in the old Sherlock Holmes story, right? Isn't it interesting that everything can be brought out in the open except 9/11? Because us people, those of us who are quite curious about 9/11, if you're curious about RFK, JFK, MLK, yeah, they killed them all. Martin, Malcolm, they killed them all. They killed all kinds of anti-war hippies, all of that stuff. But if you're curious about 9/11, if you don't believe the official story, you're just a crazy 9/11 conspiracy theorist. How about that? As African countries, faux mint dissident says, as African countries restrict French troops' companies, will it affect the EU's ability to pay? Oh, yes, it will, because they've been robbing the hell out of Africa, particularly France. France has been robbing Africa, and now France is going to have to live off of their own loot, and it ain't going to work. And I do mean loot because they're thieves. I am Valentina says, I think Trump will try to abolish elections. Yeah, but you know what? Every 4 years, look. 2008, the people hated Obama. We're never going to have an election. Obama will abolish elections. 2017, the people hated Trump. We'll never have an election. Trump is going to abolish elections. 2021, this is it. Even I'll put it like this. I was thinking to myself, I don't know if Trump's ever going to take off. So I think we're going to have elections. That's what I'm trying to get at, guys. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is Kellogg a low-key Bolton? I guess, I don't know. They're all a low-key Bolton to me. Sparkster says, the people Biden pardoned give up their Fifth Amendment rights and can still be forced to testify in court. Absolutely, absolutely. Not just in court, in front of Congress. Why? Because the Fifth Amendment frees you from testifying against yourself and subjecting yourself to criminal prosecution, right? But if you can't be criminally prosecuted, then you don't have the Fifth Amendment protections, which means they can bring you into Congress and order you. A judge can order you to talk. And if you don't talk, they can find you in contempt of Congress, court, whatever, and throw you in jail and say, you got to talk. Well, I'm not going to talk. All right, we'll throw you in jail for 8 months and bring you back in front of Congress. You ready to talk? Get now? Nope. Throw you back in. You can actually get life in prison because they can keep throwing you in prison over and over until you decide to talk. And if you lie, that's a felony. So, yeah, they can't go to jail. I mean, they can't be prosecuted for certain things, but they are in one hell of a mess. Sparky says, fun fact, Zelensky isn't Jewish, nor has he ever claimed to be. Others claim it to shield Nazi. His dad was, but his mother wasn't, and he never converted. Internet scrubbed about it. Ask Mark Sloboda. Interesting, because according to the Israelis, your mother, a Jewish mother, is what makes you Jewish. So that's interesting. Not that I'm saying I'm not one to say who's Jewish or not. My brother was Jewish because he converted in the military. And trust me, the Zionists wouldn't like to hear what he had to say about Israel. He'd be thrown he passed away, but he'd be thrown off the internet. And he was a Jewish guy, went to synagogue every week. Sparky, I knew a puddinhead, but I'm from the deep south. There you go, Sparkster. Good old puddinhead. Any thoughts on the AI race between China and US? It ain't a race no more. It's like an AI race between me and Usain Bolt. You know what I mean? It ain't a race. Here's what I'll say about it. Thanks a lot, Jam. Here's what I will say about it. What we're seeing is something far bigger than an AI race. What we're seeing is that when it comes to technology, period, that China is becoming the world power, and AI is just one of the areas, and that the United States better talk to China, the US better work with China, better have a good relationship with China. Look, think about this. Trump takes office, and you see all of the tech bros all around him. Within 5 days after he takes Congress, they wipe out the AI market. Those things are related. It's not an accident. They could have did it before Trump took office. They could have did it they probably had this thing for months. But in international politics, in international geopolitics, timing is everything. When something happens, I'm a former investigator. We did timelines. What happened here, here, here. We'd have a little map. We'd have pins. We'd have timelines, all that kind of stuff. A little piece of string or yarn, different colored yarn going from one pin to the other, right? Stick a pin in it. You might have heard, well, stick a pin in that one, right? This is where that happened. That's what it came from. You got a map, something happened at that point, you stick a pin in it, right? So you can visually see what's going on. My point being, it's not an accident that 5 days, whatever, 4 days, less than a week after Donald Trump took office, the Chinese planted a flag, boink, on the AI market and said it's ours. And not only is it ours, we don't need to make money off of it. We'll do it for nothing. And next thing you know, NVIDIA and these others are like, oh crap, we just lost $500 billion in market cap space, right? It was the Chinese sending a message. That ain't all. You think that's all they can do? They can do a lot more, and they can do it cheaper. It's like this. The US can print a lot of money and pour it into the market and wipe out your company, right? Your country. We can manipulate currency in a way that destroys your economy and your country. What the Chinese are saying is this. We can manipulate software in a way that does that. We can manipulate technology. So don't try us. Don't try us. In the same way that we took that out, we can take other things out and understand. We're very, very powerful now when it comes to these things. So don't think that's all. Don't think that's the only arrow in our quiver. We need to be friends. We need to be allies. We need to at least work out a deal so that we're not enemies. And no other technology. You know, it's kind of like this. All right, we blew up your AI stuff, and we'll blow up more. Doesn't need to happen. Okay, so let's negotiate, and we don't have to take out any of your other technology fields. We'll do this thing together. So it was a elbow. It was a power play, man. It was gangster. It was gangster. Raphael says, gee, I'm glad to learn about the memo where Putin already ordered that Z will be arrested and put on trial in Moscow after the peace is signed. He did the same thing to the Chechen leaders. Oh, I don't know. It's news to me. I don't know about that, but thanks. I'll look into it. Let's keep going. I think that's it. All right, let's look at Rockfin. All right. Thank you very much, David Boteller. And last but not least, we're going to Rumble to see if there's a Rumble Reds. Do we have any Rumble? I don't see any Rumble rants. No Rumble rant. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I certainly appreciate that. If you can, as I walk out the door, follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Telegram, follow me everywhere. And of course, patreon.com is a way that you can help the show. PayPal, buy me a coffee is great. You put it on there, buy Garland a coffee. How much? 5 beans, how many? However many you want. And then if you want to now, it's just like Patreon. If you choose, you can now become a monthly sponsor on Buy Me a Coffee, whatever it is, that is, whatever you can do is appreciated. We got a join button. Hit the join button so you can be a member. We can grow the membership of this particular channel. And last but not least, please share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much for hanging around with Scott and I. Peace. I'm out.